Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to a very special webcast, folks. I'm really excited about this. Today we're going to dive into some interesting topical areas. We're going to wax philosophical, it's true. The title of today's show is A Philosophy of Data, Power of the Platform. This is really interesting stuff, folks. It's actually the culmination of about a year of work between myself and, of course, Robin Bloor and some other experts in the field, and our good friend David Friedland and his team from IRI, the co-sort company. They're a sponsor of this philosophical exploration, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you guys have fun too. As always, ask us some hard questions as we dive in, but I'll explain where we're going as we get through this, so stand by. So there are the slides. There's a slide about our presenters today. Yours truly at the top, Chief Analyst Robin Bloor in the middle, and David Friedland, Senior Vice President at IRI, the co-sort company. David is a veteran of the industry. In fact, some of the smartest people I know worked for him years ago, including Philip Russum and a couple other analysts in this space. So he's been around a long time, learned a lot of lessons, has a lot to share with you today. So the topic as a philosophy of data really came from discussions I had with David about a year and a half ago, I suppose, and he was kind enough and willing enough and exploratory enough to dive in with us and do this series of podcasts on the philosophy of data. Well, as it turns out, a lot of data professionals like philosophy too. It kind of makes sense for various reasons, and we'll kind of walk through this real quick. So look at these different types of philosophy: axiology, epistemology, and ontology, or metaphysics. Well, they all apply to different areas of the philosophical paradigm, if you will. It's all about studying and trying to understand and learn stuff, but they have different approaches and different spectrums, if you will, of focus. So axiology, the study of value, the investigation of its nature, criteria, and metaphysical status, well, a lot of that stuff in the data world gets down to business value, right? So if you're not doing projects with business value in mind, it's going to be accidental if you get business value from them. And you hear this all the time with technology companies when they talk about working with organizations and trying to get them some value. If you do not have a business case in mind, if you're not focused on the business case, it's very easy to get off track and to go down a wormhole, essentially, or a rabbit hole. And you don't want to do that. So technology can be fun to work with. It can be interesting. There are a lot of people who like to play with technology, but technology for technology's sake is not a road to success. You always want to have some business case in mind. So axiology, that branch of philosophy, clearly applies to the whole realm of trying to make sure you get business value from this stuff. It's really important to stay focused on that and to remain focused on that. One of my favorite cliches is that people don't need to be taught so much as reminded, right? We've all learned a great deal over our lives, but we do need to be reminded about things, and that's one of the ways that philosophy can help you stay on track in your business. And the other side of axiology would have to be ethics. So if you think about topics like data governance, for example, well, that's largely an ethical conversation. It's also a legal conversation at certain points. If you're in industries that are heavily regulated, you have to be very careful about your data management policies. Whether you use data masking, for example, for sensitive data, personally sensitive data, what kind of security practices you have in place, especially if you're a bank or a healthcare company. Suddenly that becomes a legal issue as well as an ethical issue. But ethically speaking, there are lots and lots of issues, very serious issues around data and data management and data privacy and respecting people's privacy. So epistemology, the study of knowledge, well, here we go, knowledge management. Remember that term? I would argue it's coming back to a certain degree, in part because we have come a long way over the last few years, and in part because the tools and technologies have really advanced in some significant ways to enable what we can reasonably, honestly look ourselves in the eye and call knowledge management. Back in the day, when the term first became popular, those were really just repositories of information, and you needed people to go through and sift through them and read and spend a lot of time thinking about stuff to get somewhere. Well, now we're actually getting pretty far down the road where some of these tools and technologies and platforms can help curate information and make actual knowledge and automate to a certain degree that process, such that at least you know the data is vetted, you know the data is cleansed, you know the data is largely trusted or is mostly trusted. And that's all very useful stuff, because at the end of the day, if you don't trust your data, you're not really going to make decisions based on your data, and then why do you even have all this data, or why do you invest in data management practices? Well, all of that maps back to being able to trust the data and make decisions based upon the data. So then you have ontology or metaphysics, the study of what is really real. I have to throw in my favorite movie quote here from Repo Man where the guy says, it was so real, it was realistic. What is really real? Well, this is actually a pretty interesting subject area too in terms of what is real. Are the numbers real? There's a lot of fake data out there. We keep hearing about fake news, but there's bad data. There's bad data because people entered it incorrectly. There's bad data because people intentionally entered it incorrectly, or because people summarize things, or even when you do mappings from one system to another and don't get it right, that's where you have data quality issues. So the study of what is real, well, that's kind of what we're doing all day long in the data management world. We're trying to understand, is this an accurate depiction of my business? Is this the opportunity? Is this the risk? Is this the path that I should take going forward? These are all very, very good questions. And this kind of shows you why philosophy is relevant to this whole conversation. And the bigger, broader picture, I would just say, is something my philosophy teacher taught me years ago when he said that really one of the best values of philosophy for a student and for a person in the world is that it helps you look at the world through different lenses and to have a different perspective on what it is that you're seeing. Because once you've seen things from multiple perspectives, you can really get a better idea of what's actually going on in the world. So we'll talk about some of that stuff today. Oops, so, excuse me. So here we go, thought leaders. This program, we did a whole series of podcasts and articles, and there are transcripts that you can find on the IRI website. We'll email you after the show with a link to all that. So these are fantastic conversations with very serious visionaries in the field. Of course, Dr. Robin Bloor, our chief analyst, he did one of these. Gwen Thomas of the Data Governance Institute, the lady who kind of invented data governance, frankly, in the modern world, she did one of these podcasts. Rick Sherman, one of my best friends in the business, he did one of these, and an article. Dan Lindstedt did one of these. He's the Data Vault guy. Of course, David Freeland, we're going to hear from him today. And yours truly participated in all of these things, and it was a really fun and interesting process. So if you want some perspective on this industry, how we got here, what are some key tenets to keep in mind, these are the folks to look to. And here's just some of the things that they said. So Dan Lindstedt talked about the importance of a platform, and that's what we're going to talk about at some great length today when we hear from David. So what the folks at IRI have done is very interesting, actually. They're not the only ones, but they have taken a very significant focus over the last X number of years. It's been around a long time. They're a veteran in the field, and they've really built out an end-to-end platform. Well, when you think about issues like data governance, when you think about issues like analytics even, when you think about reporting, when you think about having a strategic view of your organization, well, if you don't have a data management platform, you can still govern, but it's going to be a lot harder to govern than if you did have a platform, for the simple reason that a platform gives you a marshaling area. It gives you a place where you know you can go to see where the data comes from, what did the data look like when it arrived, what transformations did we do to the data, what is the lineage, the provenance, all that stuff. You can see it all, and you have one trusted source for marshaling and managing that data. That's not to say mistakes won't be made. They will be made. But if they're all made in the same place, at least you know where to find them, and that's a very significant thing to keep in mind. So Dan said management, governance, architecture, process flows, metadata, definitions, all that flows together to create a common, seamless analytics platform. That's, of course, a perfect world scenario. Gwen talked about data governance. We need to understand our stakeholders. That's a really important point that she makes there, and she spent a lot of time working with stakeholders across a wide range of institutions, large and small, so she understands. And one of the things I'll throw out there about the importance of philosophy again, but also language, and let's face it, computer programs are written in languages. I think a lot of people forget that sometimes, that languages themselves are not perfect, which means sometimes you have to wrangle words together to coordinate a thought and communicate what you're trying to say. Well, language is imperfect, and not everybody knows what you're trying to say as you're trying to say it. This is one of the big stumbling blocks, I think, in communication. That's why context is so important. And we're seeing that more and more in terms of business decisions based on data. You need to understand the context of the situation, and context has all kinds of things baked into it. So she talked a lot about the importance of that. Robin talked about how information is distinctly different to the other two fly-by-nights of the digital world. I love that line. Hardware and software. Information is immortal if properly tended to. Well, that's why we still talk about guys like Socrates. That's why we still talk about guys like Descartes. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. He was one of the inspirations in my life, quite frankly, and got me into what I do today. And then Rick Sherman had a great quote about context. More and more truths or context are being applied today, which just means more and more expansive use of data, right? So his point was, data is out there, and it's great. The more context you can apply to it, the better you understand it for your purpose as the stakeholder in your organization or your community, the better you can use it, the better you can make some smart decisions. So with that long-winded approach or that long introduction, let me hand it off to data expert Robin Bloor, who's going to talk about governance. And this is just one of the 5 pillars that you'll hear from David Friedman in his presentation. Governance is one. You'll see what the others are all about. But in that conversation, I think you'll get a better idea for why we chose this broad, interesting context or environment in which to discuss this topic. So with that, Robin, take it away on data governance.
Okay. Well, the statue is the statue of Plato. And I picked that really because in the Republic he had thoughts about governance too. I'm only covering one particular area simply because I'm only here to speak for 10 minutes. And the reason that I chose governance rather than any of the other, well, what David calls pillars, was that I'd been thinking about it recently and I'd done some work on it recently. So I'm just going to breeze through some thoughts about this. And this is, I've been working on big data now for about 4 or 5 years. And it gets bigger every year. If data governance was important before big data, and it absolutely was, far more important now. So it was about a couple of weeks ago I was writing something and I started to consider, I mean it wasn't for the first time, the idea of self-defining data and what that would be. You know, and it's an interesting idea because, you know, data as it is born is either born to be shared or born to not be shared. And the stuff that's born to be shared is normally recorded in some form or other where it's easy to share, but we don't actually have a standard for sharing data. But if data was to be ultimately shareable with anyone anywhere, with any program anywhere, then it would be self-defining. So the question is, what's self-defining data? And this is the idea, and it all has, the reason I'm talking about this is it all has implications for governance. You know, data is born at a particular time, it's born in a particular geographical location, it's born in either a virtual or logical location. It has a source device and it has the software that created it. Therefore, there's a device ID. If it's derived data, then there's a means of derivation that it relates to. It has a creator, some individual or something created. It has an owner. Somebody owns it. Could be a collection of people. It has permissions as to how it can be used. It has status. You need to know whether the piece of data you're looking at is, for example, the golden copy, the prime copy, or maybe it's just a copy of the data, or maybe it's derived from data. You need to know the metadata, which is about meaning. You need an audit trail of how it's been used, and you need an archive flag for when it is to be put away, and all of that information, which would be, if you recorded it all, a fairly large amount of information. It's got nothing to do with the data values. The data values are what they are. And most of these, and these are just suggested ideas that I created, but the reason that I suggested them was that I was thinking about governance, and I just thought I'd say a few things about governance in terms of what I think it is. You know, first of all, the first thing to say about data governance is it should be applied and live within the system of record, whatever that is. Data lakes are becoming systems of record, but before the data lakes, the system of record was pretty much all the transactional systems of an organization. That's what needs to be governed, the data that's created or taken into the organization. And these are the things that are part of it. You need to know the provenance and the lineage. If you don't know that, you can't do analytics on it accurately. You can have no confidence in what the results of the analytics are. It needs to have data cleansing applied to it. Therefore, it needs to be considered from the point of view as is it accurate. It needs to have data security applied to it, including, the permissions as to who has the right to actually look at it and who has the right to change it if it's data that can be changed. There needs to be compliance. Those are external rules, sometimes applied by governments themselves, sometimes applied by organizations. There needs to be data integrity. You need to, in one way or another, know that the data remains as once cleansed. It remains as it is in its cleansed state until it's no longer required. You need an audit record because you need to know what's done with it. That's part of security, but there's also other reasons for having that. You need life cycle management so you can destroy it or finally archive at some point in time. And you need the meaning, and the reason that I listed meaning last is that that's a really difficult part, because meaning, it's not even, in my opinion, it's not even finally resolved as to what data meaning actually is. But now that we have a fair amount of semantic technology, we're getting very close to it. And the final thing to say, data governance is a perpetual process. It doesn't, it isn't something you do one day, it's something you're doing all the time. So, importance of governance, this is a final statement from me, it can only increase. Ungoverned data will, in my opinion, prove to be costly data. And having said that, I'll pass it back to Eric.
Yeah, and as I hand it off to David, I wanted to point out one other thing and let her remember this. In terms of using data for your business, we talk about this all day. All of the companies in this space obviously believe that you can get value from data, which is why they build technologies to do just that. And there are all these pieces and parts. We've gone around and around over these years, maybe the last 15 years or so, or 20, between platform players and best of breed, platform players and best of breed. And, of course, you have a lot of best of breed that get acquired by platform players, and sometimes you have best of breed that are part of platforms that are built out. Well, the bottom line is that data is useful, that's true, but at any given time in an organization, at best, I would say 2% of that data has immediate value, at best. So that means at any given time, 98% of the data doesn't have a lot of value. That doesn't mean it's not going to have value. It may at some point in time for historical context, for building a profile around a customer, for doing trend analysis, for doing predictions, whatever the case may be. But one of the keys is that you want to be able to focus on most important data for you right now at this point in time. So anyway, back to the concept of a platform. We're going to talk again with David. I'm going to hand it off to him. You can see information about the CoSort company here. Known since 1978. Like, think about that. These guys have been around. I was 10 years old back then. That's a long time ago. So they've been out there a long time. And you'll hear a little bit about Eclipse. This is a very interesting move that the folks at IRI have made, is they really built their platform out around the Eclipse Foundation. That's very useful stuff. So developers, of course, play a significant role in rolling out any kind of data application or program for an organization. And Eclipse is an extremely popular open source environment for building applications and for coding and for Java, of course. So it's really interesting that they took this approach, and I think it's really lent well to their focus and where they're trying to go of providing an end-to-end platform for data. So with that, I'm going to hand the keys to David. David, take it away. The floor is yours.
Yeah, appreciate that, Eric. Good introduction to the company and platform to some extent, which we're happy to talk about and share with people, most of whom will be a first impression, not only of the platform, but the company itself. And as you mentioned, we've been around for, next year will be 40 years. That's a pretty big milestone. People say, well, I haven't heard of you, and we do still get that a lot, and I guess that's partly our fault, partly theirs. And I guess we're more of the Northwestern Mutual of the software industry, the quiet company, just sort of stable and quiet. And many of our customers have been under the radar, I think, because they've used the core of our data management and manipulation capability called CoSort within lots of different kinds of applications, which aren't terribly sexy. They don't always get a lot of visibility, but they're mission critical. It's infrastructural data processing stuff that's got to churn a lot of data very quickly and reliably, and of course this predates Hadoop and still to some extent is competitive with it as an alternative for people with, let's say, data under 10 terabytes, and they have their own systems, don't want to go to the grid. They've been using our CoSort engine for a very long time. And from there, we've branched out a lot of its core data transformation capability to encompass report generation and data conversion and migration and remapping and masking and data quality and all manner of things that happen during the data management lifecycle. So I'm just kind of giving you a background as to how our company evolved and how this platform that I'm about to introduce came to be. But what you're looking at here are just some logos of the kinds of customers that we have around the world, many of whom are in the banking and financial services industry and insurance, because it reflects their roots and perhaps ours on mainframe migrations where we originally came from. But that was a long time ago, and there's been a lot of evolution and modernity added to the technology stack since, and we'll kind of show that as we go. So the platform is called Voracity. It was introduced about a year or so ago, kind of in a beta state, and these things take a long time to roll out. There's a heck of a lot going on inside of it. At first blush, it may appear to be just yet another ETL tool, but I think if you look a little harder, you'll notice a lot more going on. And the whole idea is to be an end-to-end data management and manipulation platform that can discover data wherever it lives, integrate it, bring it all together, unify it, do what needs to be done, including cleanse it, govern it and migrate it, and then ultimately analyze it. And we'll be talking a little bit about all of those things. Robin obviously gave us decent shrift on the governance side, and there's obviously overlap with a little bit of what he talked about. But all of these are very meaty, weighty topics that could be, could take up hours just to discuss any one of them. So what's going to happen here is just a very quick, brief introduction to what we're talking about. But if you are interested, I suggest that you go into the IRI website, the Voracity page, and the products area will take you very quickly into the bowels of the stuff. And with respect to their tie-ups to the philosophy of data and the whole podcast series, and what all of the gurus who contributed not only to the Philosophy of Data podcast series, but in essence to the platform and its development itself over the years, you'll get a lot of insight if you take a look at that podcast that was done, I think, in September of 2016. Yep, it was the podcast that I did with Eric, and I should probably try and share this link with everybody so they can have that in the chat window if you look at that now. Anyway, back to the platform. Like I say, this is it's designed to be a marshalling area for everything you need to do to curate data throughout its life cycle from cradle to grave. And there's a lot that's on offer here that's essentially part of the core platform. There are some premium things you can bolt onto it for some extra cost, but a lot of people don't need that. And so commercially, this is probably the only platform of its kind on the market that is as comprehensive as this is, whilst affordable and high performant by virtue of its CoSort engine doing the data movement and manipulation by default, or seamless Hadoop extensions, which I'll talk about a little bit as well.
Yeah, and real quick, David, maybe you could get in just to explain to people who are new to IRI, that CoSort, Robin has talked about this many times on other shows. Sorting is a very expensive process that databases do. Sorting is kind of a painful thing to do, and you guys really focused on that from the outset. So that was the kernel of your technology, right? And then you built out the platform around that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, sorting is sort of the foundation of a heck of a lot in computer science, as people who've taken the courses know. It's also been the foundation of larger companies than us, including Computer Associates. Just a quick story, CA-sort was kind of thought that we were infringing with CO-sort back in 1978. So my dad, who founded the company, was in Charles Wang's office in Illandia, New York, and they kind of just resolved it. We dropped the hyphen, so that's where CoSort without it comes from, just so you know. And then another company competes with us called SyncSort, made their bones in the sorting space as well. So it's a big deal. You're right. When data double the resource requirements to process it can triple, it's an exponential problem. So you need the right kind of algorithms and resource optimization to deal with it as the data grow. It's just that that kind of a problem. So yeah, it was the foundation of the company and the technology stack, and it's still the engine in Voracity by default. And in fact, it spun off and gave rise to some of the other tools you're looking at on the screen, including the next form migration tool, Field Shield for data masking, RoGen for data protection. So it is the foundation for quite a bit. But the 8 products right now, including Voracity, are broken down into 2 suites, but Voracity is the overarching platform that includes just about everything you see on the screen. It is also designed to be a big data platform, not necessarily to compete with the likes of a commercial Hadoop distribution, although you'll see a fair amount of overlap if you drill down a bit, and we do talk to them. We do have in Voracity an option to fire off many of our data transformation, masking, test data generation type jobs in, not only with a CoSort engine, but in a Cloudera stack, Hortonworks or MapR, or any generic Apache Hadoop cluster. And it's meant to deal with the things that the big data is known to challenge us all with around the size of the data and its makeup, the way it comes in, batch or real time, the nature of the data itself being often crappy, like in a data lake. It hasn't been cleaned up or masked or governed in a serious way, and you need to, exercise those demons out of it. And then there's the whole value issue, which, not only is it about the value from the data, but the value of the platform as a technological option that you can afford. So, I won't say more on that point now. The sources and targets of data that we're supporting, of course, span the gamut from new down to old. The new stuff, of course, is in the cloud, and it's up in NoSQL databases, and it's in Hadoop. So those are supported to and from, or from and to, I should say. And then the traditional stuff, the small data, if you will, so-called, that's sitting in flat files or relational databases, or even some semi-structured constructs in between, and then back to the old proprietary mainframe formats. Fortunately, there are drivers for all these things that ODBC and JDBC, namely, that we tie up to that give you access to pretty much anything data-wise that you need to manage. So that goes back to the image on the left and the right, sources and targets. So again, a central marshaling area, as you pointed out, Eric, where you can bring everything you want together to deal with it for whatever you need to deal with it for, whether it's an enterprise data warehouse, or it's just a migration from one database to another, or one platform to another where you have to change the file formats or Indian states of things, or you need to generate reports, you need to do some data quality work. All of these types of activities are supported in the platform. So it precludes the need to invest in a bunch of specialty tools, having to spin them up, license and learn them. The idea here is, as you said, it's all front-ended in Eclipse. The one GUI kind of does it all. It's the client kitchen sink for everything. And what happens at execution time are typically some job scripts or batch files ultimately, but they all get created in different ways. So you'll see that the IRI Workbench GUI for Voracity, the Eclipse GUI, gives you the freedom to choose the method of designing these jobs. There are fit-for-purpose wizards which take you end-to-end, hold your hand through the specification of these things, whether they're ETL processes or masking or reporting jobs, whatever it is, and those will produce the end jobs, which you can then modify in scripts directly with a syntax-aware editor and an outline, or you go into dialogues to modify them, or diagrams, a la ETL tooling, where you have a transform mapping diagram, a workflow diagram. So the idea is to have a lot of different ways to get these jobs to build, to modify, and ultimately deploy, again, in CoSort or a Hadoop engine. But let's take a look now at the pillars, the 5 pillars of Voracity: discovery, integration, migration, governance, and analytics. So I'll just, again, very briefly hit at these because we just don't have time. But for those interested, the data discovery capabilities in the platform are expressed through job wizards from the top toolbar menu, and depending on what you need to do, it will help you find out what's going on. You know, you connect the sources of data that you have, and you can start to learn about them in the normal profiling way. So if you're familiar with database profilers, there's a wizard for that gives you the statistical information about what's in the tables, as well as the ability to search based on patterns or fuzzy match algorithms, do referential integrity checks and ER diagrams, and the kinds of things you would want to do to find out what's in your databases. And the same is also available for flat file formats, where you can get searches to happen and statistical information about what you've got. And then, of course, that's very important for all the downstream processing. You really can't very often know what you need to do until you see what you've got. Data classification, a whole other area, speaks to governance too, but this is a big deal where we've have a more passive searching capability going on and allowing you to sort of apply a semantic or ontological constructs to data based on, you know, more business-oriented definitions or glossaries, where, you know, data that, you know, fits the profile is, you know, belongs to a certain, you know, domain-driven identifier. So that automated capability is there not only to get data into classes and groups of classes, but also to use those classes and class groups to have transformation or protection rules applied on a global basis. So that's a particularly powerful feature of data discovery, not just to report on what you have, but to make use of it in an automated way downstream when you have to do, let's say, you know, data masking on a global rule basis. There is also a dark data discovery wizard. This is an interesting area where we define dark data kind of as Gartner does. It's sort of, you know it's there, but you don't know what's in it. These refer to unstructured text documents that you can search through based on patterns and combinations of patterns, and ultimately find those values, extract them and bucket them into flat files, get the metadata associated with not only the new columns you built, but also some of the more forensic information on the sources that were found. So that's a cool little job wizard that's in there too. All of this is very well detailed on the IRI blog site if you go into the various categories, or you just do a search on discovery. And also at various points along the way on in the website, when you look at, let's say, the Voracity GUI in the IRI Workbench, there's a page called Discover, and you'll see links to all these different things and get into very minute detail about what's in each. So that's discovery. Kind of tells you what you need to know about what data you have around the enterprise. As long as you can connect to it, you can get these kind of reports and useful data classes out of it. Integration, of course, is familiar to everybody who's dealing in the data warehouse world, and we've been an engine of ETL since 1999, at least according to Hyperion, who at that time, you know, said we really had an engine. We just never had become a platform for it or a full-on ETL tool really until now. So of course that's a very mature market. There's a lot of commercial considerations around this part of Voracity. You know, is it an ETL tool? And the answer is yes, it is now, but it's also a lot more than that. But it is of interest to people who are in the data warehouse space, who are maybe looking for something a little faster or cheaper than some of the legacy mega vendor ETL tools that are better known just for that. So as you can see, we're there with a much higher performing engine. And there are, at the blog site in the ETL subcategory, you'll find articles about how Voracity is used in an enterprise data warehouse, logical data warehouse, operational data store / enterprise data hub, and data lake environment. So all types of data integration activities going on, including the ancillary operations like slowly changing dimension reports, all the different types, data-based change data capture as to differentiate from log-based change data capture. There are specific wizards for data transpositioning from rows to columns, which is pivoting or reverse unpivoting. Data unification is also here by way of more of a quality-oriented MDM wizard. I won't get into. Again, that's just weeds. There's a great deal of data integration capability in this thing for those interested. This screenshot just talks a little bit about the syntax underlying the data definition and manipulation metadata that you'll get exposed to if you want to drill down into the scripts. And again, you don't have to, but what's nice about this approach is that these scripts are user-friendly. They're self-documenting. They're not hidden or cryptic. You can work with them directly if you want to, or some people like to. You know, there are sort of old-school people who aren't strictly about wizards and dialogues and mapping diagrams. You can still get into the weeds here. And then you can also do this outside of the GUI. They're just text files, and you can run them on the command line. But you know, you run them on the command line on a machine where the code-sort engine's running with the program called SortCL, or you can just run the same thing in MapReduce, SparkStorm, SparkStream, or Tez, and there's no changes needed because we're picking up on that metadata and getting the conversion to happen automatically. So it is a seamless move to Hadoop if you've got the grid connected. A little more imagery there. And again, if you go to our blog site, you'll see that front and center on the first page, you know, what the capabilities are. But again, this is all in Eclipse. It's all part of the same interface, whether you're running locally, remotely, or in a cluster.
And I remember in our conversations, David, you had mentioned something that I thought was actually quite compelling. You talked about the ergonomics of data management systems. And, you know, I can tell you one of the interesting, if a bit concerning developments I'm seeing out there in the world, especially in the cloud, but also on mobile devices and elsewhere, is this constant shifting of the interface sands. Interfaces just keep changing all the time. Even on your iPhone, every time you update your operating system, there's some new way to work with it. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not as good. But the point is, once you learn how to use a tool, it's nice to keep using the tool that you know how to use. And so if it covers the spectrum of issues that you want to handle, that's a pretty serious benefit, it seems to me. I mean, just think about it in terms of a car. If you're always renting cars, for example, the interface is always different. All the different options are in different places, and it just begets a little bit of frustration. But I thought that was a clever point that you made about the importance of ergonomics, right?
Yeah, and I think the folks at Eclipse are the foundation, and all of its millions of contributors, or at least users, have kind of figured that out, and they appreciate its familiarity and its relative ease of use because it's been there to support all the Java programmers from time immemorial. So it needs to reflect people's preferences for developing applications, and we've just sort of extended it with wizards of our own and diagrams and things that work in the same environment. So, yeah, ergonomics is important not only from the standpoint of familiarity, but also choices. Like I said, you can use scripts, you can use wizards, you can use dialogues, what have you. This is the final slide in the data integration bit here. I just wanted to point this out for folks who happen to be using other ETL tools. You can accelerate them with Voracity jobs where a co-sort-driven data transformation, usually sort, join, or aggregation, which are the slow runners on most of those other tools. We can speed those up, or if you wanted to leave outright, you could. Company called Analytics DS, for those familiar with it, has the capability of replatforming code from one ETL tool to another. So if you wanted to leave, you could. Okay, let's talk data migration. This is a big topic. There's some overlap, obviously, with ETL, but the idea here is that you can move from one database to another, from one file format to another, from one platform or set of applications to another, with different wizards that basically have the same effect of, defining your sources and your targets, and sometimes some transformations that might happen along the way. But that stuff exists and gives you the ability to move and map data and change it as you go, either on a one-off basis or on a multi-source, multi-table type of a basis, going to lots of different targets. So you could also look at it as a kind of a federation process as well. But mostly here we're talking about data migration and data replication users. Okay. So data governance. Again, just blown by data migration in 30 seconds when in reality it's a very long topic. We just don't have time. Governance, huge area, and that's why I think Robin touched on it. But it is a very important part of any data management life cycle from soup to nuts. There's governance considerations even in the discovery of data, which the podcast Eric and I had back in September kind of goes into a little bit. But we think of data governance after discovery as dealing in areas like masking, as Robin said. That's huge for us. Actually, it's a pretty big strength. But also data cleansing, data quality, and the management of data, master data, I should say, and the management of metadata. Also huge topics we don't have time to deal with. Our master data management is, we've got a bit of it. We're not best of breed there, to be honest. Nobody can be a jack of all trades and master of all. We're sort of a jack of all trades and master of some. I would say we're a master at data masking and a master at high performance smart synthetic test data generation, and we do have a standalone a DCAP, a data centric audit and protection firewall product for databases as well, that Veracity's GUI can front end as far as a database administration tool. But there are, you need to have a lot of data governance capability to carry out and steward the policies that that data governance officers and security officers and anybody with a conscience needs to think about. So that's why these capabilities are here. They are effectively automated. They are synced up with the data discovery and classification modules that I mentioned earlier, and they go hand in hand with other operations in the platform, including ETL. Right, so there's no reason why you necessarily have to think of data masking as a standalone operation when it can be applied in the context of a transformation operation or a report generation option or a data preparation activity where you're using this platform to blend or wrangle data for the benefit of a third-party analytic target or BI visualization tool. Okay. Data quality, there is a lot of capability under the hood here as well, and a couple of big pages on our website about and blog site about the types of selection and filtering and validation and checking and changing you can do with respect to the format and the value ranges and the context and the reconciliation of data. So that's a pretty big area of governance as well. This slide speaks to some of the masking capabilities. As I said, we get pretty deep in that space. We have a standalone product called Field Shield, which is all built into the Veracity platform here. But it's the whole idea of connecting to what you've got, finding what's in it, doing those searches and those classifications for sensitive data, be it PII, PHI, PAN, what have you. So that you can effectively find it and mask it in the ways that it needs to be masked, reversible or not, pretty or not, and as long as it's going to protect it effectively and nullify the effect of a breach or comply with the privacy law, you can get done what you need to do. This is a screenshot showing how data is being masked in the Mongo database. Again, you can mask data that's in HDFS as well. Without any changes to the underlying code. Same for semi-structured text files like XML. This slide talking about test data management and test data generation. This is a big topic, especially for people who are doing application development or prototyping databases or even trying to set up and stress test, data warehouse operation or some new application. So this is also a strength for us, and in fact, we built this capability right off of the CoSort engine and metadata, so that we could test CoSort. Really, we needed a way to rapidly generate all manner of file targets. That's how the thing got started about 10 years ago, and we just kept building it up and fleshing it out so that it could address the need to also produce structurally and referentially correct database test data. So Rojan will do that automatically. Voracity will do that automatically with the new test data job wizards that are available from the toolbar. So yeah, test data, another big and important subject for people who need to do testing and don't want to use or cannot use production data, masked or otherwise. Yeah, here's some screenshots around the test data generation job wizards showing how this stuff goes. Hold your hand through the process of, you tell it what you're pointing at, and you give it some rules along the way as well. You have the ability to synthesize data either from a random generation point of view according to the data type and whatever parameters you impose around that, and also from the point of random selection from real data, so that you can, on a column-by-column basis, decide whether you want to have data that's truly from scratch or something that's picked at random with different kinds of random pulls from real sources.
Yeah, seeing is believing, right? Right.
Well, and data want test data that looks real.
Yeah, right. Well, and data masking is so important these days with all these breaches, right? I mean, goodness, it's a bit disconcerting when you see the kinds of organizations, including the White House last year, getting hacked with data being pilfered, and you just have to stay on top of your own personal life all the time with financial data because there are so many hacks. So this data masking technology seems to me is important now. It's going to be more important with every passing day, right?
Yeah, masking for what's in production, and then if it's if you need data that represents production, and in order to test with it, you don't want to use production data. You want to either mask that production data, or in this case, synthesize it. We do both. We can again mask it with the field shield capability and Voracity, or synthesize it with the Rojan capability and Voracity, so that you're able to comply, to get what you need that's real and reflects the reality of tomorrow, and stress test what you're trying to build. Moving into the analytics space, I know several in the audience are interested in this area. This is sort of the last mile, right, of the life cycle. The purpose of marshaling all this data is ultimately so you can extract some business value out of it. That was what you talked about around axiology, I believe, in the beginning, Eric. You need to learn what can be, discover trends, patterns, realize things that you didn't know before, and the only way to do that is to make sure you're getting at the right data, you're combining it in proper ways, filtering out things that don't belong there, cleaning it up, and then ultimately analyzing it in one way or another. Voracity itself has a few different ways that we've either allowed people to use the built-ins or their own tools. And in those cases, we're a data preparation engine. So I'll just go quickly through. I think there's half a dozen options in Voracity for analytics. The first one is what we call embedded BI, which is where the business intelligence capability or the reporting formatting features and such are actually part and parcel to the language of the CoSort SortCL program, so that whilst you're defining the layout and the manipulation of your data, you can also be targeting formatted reports. So you are effectively combining the preparation and presentation of all of this data in the same I/O path, the same job script, so there's no need to isolate those activities, and that's a huge efficiency when you've got a lot of data to move. As long as your output requirements aren't super sexy, because the results of these types of job scripts are typically two-dimensional, maybe old-style green screen reports, or if you embed some HTML code inside the language, you can get the benefit of something ready for the web, as you can see it in the center of the screenshot here. So the script is on the left, and then you see an HTML file, and then you see some XML on the right, and on the top right, you see a traditional row column output in just a flat format. And there's a lot of stuff that you can put in these reports. It's worth pointing out that you should be able to filter, sort, join, aggregate, cross-calculate, layout, and get some data right away in a pretty formatted way with detail and summary records. So that's embedded BI. The second option is BERT, which is, to those familiar with Eclipse, the business intelligence reporting tool that comes for free. It's just a plugin you can download. There are also commercial extensions that make it more rich and competitive with other vendors available from OpenText, which is the BERT company that used to be called Actuate. But BERT is there, and we've done a nice tie-up with it in Voracity, where you can pump the metadata and, more importantly, the prepared data directly out of a CoSort process, which, again, does all that manipulation and wrangling, and directly into a BERT chart to give you, nice graphs and things like you see here. Okay, and what's nice is that that preparation and presentation combination happens effectively in real time because the data is transferred in memory through the ODA driver that BERT provides in Eclipse, where the output of CoSort, again, goes directly into the report when you press play. So that's pretty seamless and pretty darn fast, and the price is right. Option 3, we have a similar tie-up with a cloud-based dashboard provider, partner of ours. So if you wanted to send your results out to something that was more cloud available, and then available in a web, as you see in the internal web browser here in Eclipse, you can do that too. So that's another hookup. A fourth hookup is with Splunk. There's an add-on for Splunk, a Voracity add-on for Splunk, that prepares, cleanses, does whatever you would want to do ahead of a Splunk indexing operation. So that is a nice tight combination. When you go to index, automatically Splunk will run the Voracity job in the background to get the data ready, and that's a lot more efficient than trying to have Splunk try and prepare, mask, or do things on high volumes or on disparate sources or with funky functionality. It just isn't designed to do the way Voracity is designed to do. Option 5. This is the main story, I think, for most people because they already have the 10 or so products that are shown here. We've done benchmarks for just about all of them. They're on our blog site. The benchmark being, what is the benefit of preparing data out ahead of these tools rather than having them try to do it? Just as I mentioned for Splunk or BERT, most of these tools kind of fall down. They're not designed for big data manipulation integration. That's why some of them have hooks to Hadoop perhaps, or to database engines, or to maybe like an ETL tool, their own Java routines, none of which are particularly efficient, either from a design or a runtime point of view once you get into volume. But of course, Voracity and CoSort with Hadoop as an option are efficient, and so the idea here again is to blend, wrangle, prepare, optimize, whatever you want to call it. Richard Sherman from Athena called it data franchising back in 2003, but today it's called data preparation or blending. You get the data ready, you hand it off into a CSV, an XML file, or a database table ready for these tools to consume, and they eat it up. So instead of trying to eat 30 gig of data or 300 gig or whatever it is, they can eat 3 meg that we'll hand them, and they are happy as a clam, and they can spit out that report a heck of a lot faster. And that data is also available centrally for anybody else to use. So you just get a 2 to 20x speed up in the benchmarks that we've published. Final, oh yeah, here's one for R. For those who are more in the data science realm. R is more of an analytic platform rather than a visualization one that has its own visualization options. But it, too, could stand to have some prepared data for it. And that's also why people use Hadoop. But certainly they can use Voracity, again, with CoSort or Hadoop to get the data ready for R in smaller chunks, just because R can't handle the loads. Sixth and final option is a tie-up we're still kind of working on with more of a sexy streaming analytic partner who can tie up to social media and also to Voracity sources to get these kinds of charts that are more streaming, real-time, interactive. So it just goes from the two-dimensional green screen all the way up to the latest thing you'd want to see in real time. So that's a half a dozen options at the moment for analytics. Kind of nearing the end of the time here, so I thought I would just wrap up and have people look at the 5 pillars of Voracity in a different way. just all at once. These are sort of curative or data lifecycle management activities that you can expect to be able to perform in a platform like this, where you can get at data, look at it, discover it, bring it together and clean it up, process it and hand it off to other people, protect it to comply with privacy laws, and provide the security and trust that people who've handed you their data expect. And then also, of course, be able to analyze it as we talked about in the various ways that you need to, not only for descriptive analytics by way of a report, but also predictive analytics. And you can either use your tool, or you can use things like BERT and do linear regression and whatnot. And we have articles on those examples as well. And then if you are leaving a platform, the data migration capabilities are there. And publishing and share refers to other uses of the data for other stakeholders in the forms that they need it. And we didn't really talk too much about metadata today. I wish we had. It's a big topic, but those kinds of considerations are also factored into the design of Voracity for people who need that lineage. There's some capability we've built in, but also extensions to other technologies that specialize in it. The rest of the presentation, Eric, is about use cases here in various industries, which will, I don't need to dive in here. I just wanted to let people know they exist and what they look like, and ways in which you might think about leveraging a platform for your business goals if you happen to be in retail or consumer packaged goods, or banking, financial services, and insurance, the healthcare space, IoT, transportation and utilities and energy exploration, all manner of use cases around the movement, manipulation, and management of data in this platform. And telco also traditionally has been a very big market for our capability, just due to the high volume of call detail records that are being generated, and some use cases there. And that's pretty much it. Again, I went very, very quickly through a platform that has got a lot of moving parts, but are all reflected in the same pane of glass built on Eclipse, with different engine options, CoSort being the default, and Hadoop, MapReduce 2, Spark, SparkStream, Storm, or Tez as seamless options for those with available grids.
Yeah, and I love that you likened yourself to Northwest Mutual, the quiet company, right? You guys have been busy.
Right. Yeah, real busy. A lot of customers, and we're building new partner networks around this because it does need a deep bench of support, especially when you think about other tools on the market which have deeper communities that they've been building up. We do anticipate releasing a freemium version of Voracity and starting more of a community-oriented dialogue around it come summer. There's just a lot of work going on to flesh out some of the bits we'd like to do a little bit better around, let's say, an MDM registry hub. We want to do better tie-ups with that fixed analytic vendor I mentioned. Work with different governance platforms for visualized metadata impact analysis, let's say. So we've got a little bit more to do on the edges, but there's a great deal of capability already there. And a lot of which will be exposed free in the freemium version. And for those that want to pay and get support and other kinds of capabilities, those options will be there. Right now, Voracity is sold on a subscription basis, even though it runs typically on-prem and could be run in somebody's cloud environment. The way it's priced is more of a subscription orientation, where it's affordable, maybe $25K a year for 5 execution licenses, unlimited use of the GUI, and pretty much all inclusive, except for some of the premium technologies that you may or may not need. It's got all of the discovery, integration, migration, governance, and analytic capabilities that I mentioned for that cost, and it's it's something that most people can afford and also appreciate from the standpoint of not having to be nickel and dimed over things like hardware configurations, cores, usage types, or number of users, or number of rows processed, or any of that stuff that just gets annoying to have to account for. So we don't. We just say, you know what? How many co-sort servers are you're going to be running, and that's all we look at. But the GUI is free, and if you wanted to use it just for data discovery, you can. That's free, and we may not support it for free, but it's there for anybody who's interested. So we would encourage people interested in the platform to visit our website, IRI.com, or the blog site for a lot of in-depth technical articles and how-tos. And again, to look at that that philosophy of data podcast that you and I did back in September, where we really dived deeper into the discussions about veracity and the different philosophies that work their way into its development and its application throughout.
Yep, and folks, we will email you after their show, probably tomorrow or next week, with a link to the podcast page, or you can just look up, if you do a Google search for IRI Bloor ebook, you will go to a page where you can see all these different thought leaders there, and if you have time, listen to these conversations. Very mind-opening conversations, very thoughtful discussions with all these different experts about different aspects of the business. And just remember, the whole idea here of a philosophy of data is to keep an open mind and to look at things through different lenses to get better understanding of what's happening. It's no more important than anything else today, or it's more important, I should say, than it used to be, simply because there are so many more options these days. There are so many more data sources. Business models are upending left and right. You don't have to look too far to see examples of that. For example, Uber, think of what that does to taxi companies, Airbnb to hotels. Things are changing dramatically, and the companies that are excelling, the companies that are leading the way, are very intently focused on data and understanding data, understanding how to analyze data, and also understanding bulletproof infrastructure, right? That's the other side of the equation with these guys, is having that bulletproof, scale-out infrastructure that can withstand peaks and valleys without much difficulty. But the key is analytics. The key is understanding the data, understanding who the customer is, and being able to act on that very, very quickly. So a big thanks to IRI, the co-sort company, for funding our whole philosophy of data program. And like I say, folks, we'll send you a link with more information. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell. So thanks again. Thank you to David Friedland and to Robin Bloor, of course. And we'll catch up to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.